Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of Maternal Minds, where we focus on unpacking postpartum OCD. This episode, I'm talking to Araceli. She's also from California. She has an interesting postpartum OCD story because she went through what I think is, a lot of our worst nightmares of when having this disorder is telling someone their symptoms and then the people not knowing what it was. So let's welcome her and hear what she has to say about that. How
Hi,
are you?
everyone.
How are you? How are you doing today?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Quarantine life. So now that we have you here, thank you for being open to sharing because I know how difficult it is sometimes. Do you just want to give us a brief introduction and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Araceli, and I am a mom of two, and I've been married for about 13 years now. Feels longer sometimes. And my postpartum OCD started with my first pregnancy. Probably after 6 months that my daughter was born, it just kind of kicked in.
Yeah.
Um, it started slowly with intrusive thoughts here and there, but they were very easy to dismiss. And probably at the 6 month mark, I just spiraled from there. It was just constant harm thoughts.
So when you had the intrusive thoughts that were easy to dismiss, what were those like?
So initially, I'd be bathing her,
Mm-hmm.
and the thought was horrific. Don't get me wrong. I
Yeah.
would be bathing my baby, and it was drown her. And I would literally have an image of me doing that. But for some reason in my head, I'm like, this is so silly. I probably heard something in the news, and I moved on to the next thing I had to do. Um, but from there, it would be like I'm driving by a freeway bridge, and it was, you should stop and throw the baby over the bridge. So I did question myself for a few seconds, but it was always like, I have to get to work, or I have to drop her off at the babysitter's. And it was easy to dismiss until the thoughts just got more intense and more frequent.
So a lot of times when we talk about intrusive thoughts, people think of images, but when you're explaining yours, it sounds like there are phrases too. Like,
Yes. So it was just kind of the image, and it
mhm.
was kind of like a do this, um, and just me visually seeing me doing that intrusive thought I was having, almost like a movie in my head.
I can see that. So what were they like when they got really bad?
So I still remember that night like it was yesterday. That day, I was cooking dinner, and my daughter's she was eating in her high chair, and the thought was, I was chopping up vegetables, and the
Mhm.
thought was to stab her, and that was just too much for me to handle. I
Yeah.
remember just throwing the knife and going to cry at a corner somewhere where she couldn't see me, and where I wouldn't see her, because looking at her kept thoughts coming. And I just kind of waited for my husband to come home, and I was afraid to tell him. I was questioning, should I tell him he's going to take it away from me?
Yeah. Were you able to hold your daughter for the rest of the day after having that scary stabbing thought?
I did. I've never had that compulsion of not like being distant with her. I
Mhm.
think it happens to me more now than it did before.
Yeah.
Um, it was I was able to hold her, but with the intrusive thoughts just one after the other.
And so when you were having the intrusive thoughts, did you know they were intrusive thoughts, or did you know it was just something that you were thinking and not necessarily that you were going to do?
I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
I was extreme. I was extremely um, ignorant when it came to mental illness.
Hmm.
I had no idea what it was. Um, I remember going to the doctor for like a postpartum checkup, and filling out like paperwork, and they were asking you questions. But at that time, nothing felt so intense to where I had to tell the doctor. So once it came on very intense, it was very scary to let anyone know, because in my head, they're going to take my daughter away.
So that day, when you're talking about when she's in the high chair, was that the first day that it really got hard, or had it been hard already for a little while?
I think that day was the day I felt like something's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is not just thoughts I dismiss.
Got it. So when your husband came home, how did you go about telling him?
Well, I was already a mess, like crying hysterically, and he's just like, "What's going on?" And I made him promise me he wouldn't take her away from me if I was honest.
Mm-hmm.
So then I just let him know I've been having these weird thoughts, and they're all around harming her. And I honestly don't know what's going on, but it feels scary. And he was just trying to comfort me and just calm me down at that point. But he suggested, like, go talk to our pastor at church, which I did. And for some reason, that gave me so much reassurance that he was like, your hormones are crazy.
Yeah.
It's normal. And for some reason, that reassurance lasted me about another year.
Really?
Yes, where I was not concerned, or I didn't feel this intense anxiety or fear. And it wasn't until a year later where things really, really spiraled pretty bad.
So after he told you that it was just hormones and you weren't going to do it, did you keep having the thoughts, or did everything just go away for that time?
I think after that day, I had maybe within that week, maybe like a few thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the reassurance I kept telling myself was, it's just my hormones. This is going to go away.
Okay. So you were giving yourself reassurance throughout that period.
Yes, I think so. And then I was so busy at the time with my daughter. I was working at the house that I think I didn't have time to have these thoughts.
And so you told your husband, did you tell anyone else in your family, or did you just keep it?
No, it was just the pastor at church, my husband, and me at that point.
Okay. And what happened after that year when the reassurance from your pastor finally went away?
It was all within about, I'm going to say, like a week and a half. It just came back one night, and it was just anything that I could possibly do to harm my child within that week. Those thoughts were just kicking in. I mean, if I was driving, what if I drive over the bridge, like just drive off the bridge? Anything with like drowning, stabbing, it was just one after the other. So I spiraled pretty quickly, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was going on. I figured postpartum depression it could be, because it was almost a year and a half later. But the anxiety was so bad, and I had to tell, it was my mother-in-law, and she's like, you have to go to the ER. And I did. I figured they're going to help me. But I still was not considering mental illness, because this is how ignorant I was to this. And I remember,
sorry, just to interject, since you didn't think mental illness at all, is it because you have no history of mental illness in your family, or no friends who had anything like anxiety or depression or OCD?
well, I think the way I grew up, that was not something you talk about. They never talked about it, and I really never learned about it at school. I think that I knew in my head was postpartum depression. But to me, the biggest fear was postpartum psychosis, even before I was pregnant. Like, that was always a fear in my mind. And to me, I think that's like the only thing that could happen that could go horribly wrong. So no, growing up, I had no idea of anything mental illness.
Okay. So what happened when you went to the ER? What did you tell them?
So I remember telling my mother-in-law, I'm like, should I be honest with them? Should I really tell them what's going on? And she's like, yes. And she kept reassuring me with the hormone thing. So I was like, okay, that's what it's going to be. And they had a psychiatrist come in, and I told him everything. He kind of went through my whole life to see what could be traumatic. And at the end, I was very honest with the thoughts. And he's like, do you want to do it? And I'm like, no. Anyways, we go through the whole thing, and he's like, are you willing to go to the psych ward for? And I said yes. I had no idea what that was, to
Was
be
your
honest.
husband with you in the room, or were they just at home?
At that, he was working, and I had my mother-in-law take me to the ER. And by that time, he was there, and I remember just telling him, I'll do whatever I need to do. I just want to be okay to be with my daughter.
Yeah, you were having these thoughts, all these violent thoughts, but you knew you absolutely did not want to do them.
No, and that's where the fear comes in, because obviously if you have these thoughts constantly and one after the other,
Yeah.
does this mean something? Does this mean I'm going to hurt my child? And I think that's where the intense anxiety for me, that's where it came from, and questioning myself.
So you agreed to stay at the psych ward?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that experience, what it was like and how they treated you there?
I think going in, I didn't have any expectations. I think in my brain, I was going in, I was going to get the help I needed, and I was going to walk out fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I was there for about, I'm going to say 5 to 6 days. And it, for me personally,
really long.
Yeah.
Were you still breastfeeding?
No, this was about 1.5 years later after I had it. Yeah. Yeah, it felt long. The first 2 days, I think I was just so emotionally drained. I think the first day I slept all day. And then they told me you have to participate, you have to be social, otherwise you're going to be here longer. So I remember like pushing myself, at least is what I remember, pushing myself to be like, I would even go to the AA meetings just so that they could see I was really trying. And I do remember having this nurse come up to me, and this nurse said, why are you in here? Because I have you down as that you're a violent person. And that kind of shocked me a little, but I was like, I understand why they wrote that down, but I'm the least violent person you'll ever meet. And she was just like, okay.
So how long were they expecting to keep you there?
I don't know. I remember I was trying to be hoping to get out, and my husband was hoping I got out 2 to 3 days later.
Okay.
And I don't know if it was the medication. They were trying to see if it was going to work or not. I honestly, I don't know if I was there so long.
Okay, so, and they said that they wanted you to be social, but were you going to any therapy sessions there, or was there any chance for you to be properly diagnosed while you were in the ward?
So when I was in there, I saw the social worker, which freaked me out. I think that to me at that moment was the scariest time, because to me it was like, social worker, they're going to take her away. I did see like a therapist, and I saw the psychiatrist. So they would ask questions about past trauma, or maybe why I was experiencing that, but they never diagnosed me there. I think at the end they said, like, you're stressed. I think it's just a lot of stress. Take care of yourself. Go walk a lot. And then they gave me my medication, and 5 days later I went home.
Did you continue taking the medication?
I think I took it for maybe 4 weeks, and I couldn't handle feeling like a zombie.
Okay. Do you know what kind they gave you? Like if it was antidepressants or something?
It was Zoloft, and it was a sleeping medication.
Got it.
Yeah.
So were you, after they let you go home, were you advised to continue seeing a therapist or a doctor regarding your medication?
So yes, I went to a group therapy, probably for a week, 2 weeks, and then I did see a psychiatrist. Every time I would go to these group meetings, probably once a week, I would see the psychiatrist. But he never diagnosed me either. It was kind of like I'd tell him how I'm feeling, and he related it to past trauma from when I was a child. And that's why I was having these thoughts. So it kind of reassured me, but the thoughts weren't going away. And he was just giving me higher doses of medication.
Okay. So I just want to tell anyone who's watching that it's not the current belief that OCD is, or that intrusive thoughts, like harm thoughts or violent thoughts like that. It's not the current belief that they are caused by past trauma. It's just the brain creates thoughts, and for whatever reason, someone with obsessive compulsive disorder will latch onto a thought, and it's the relationship with the thought that causes the problem. It's not the actual thoughts themselves.
Right.
So
and this is what he told me, but never diagnosed with anything, which was frustrating.
So how did you finally end up being diagnosed, and what did it look like for you for like the next year or so after you were told to go walking for your thoughts?
So for me, I kept going to these group talks, and my husband and me at that moment, we were moving, and he was changing jobs. So I didn't get any help or anything like that probably till my son was born, and that was 3 years later, I believe. Yeah.
And were you still struggling? Did you have anxiety? How was it for you?
I did. It was a big struggle because I thought that, okay, this is handled, it's taken care of, it's going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of started doing my own research after I went to that group therapy, and I remember I bought a book, and I just read through every possible postpartum anxiety you can have. I came across the postpartum OCD, and every symptom I read there, I was like, this is me. This is what I have. And I had to stop seeing the psychiatrist I was going to, because since my husband was changing jobs, the insurance stopped. So at this time, I had to wait until the new insurance from his job started up to find help again.
How quickly were you able to do that?
Not very quickly. I think my symptoms kind of went away for a while, and I'm like, okay, I'm fine. And
how it like ebbs and flows, and you can feel good, and you really feel like there's nothing happening or nothing wrong.
Yeah, to the point where you question, like, oh, maybe I don't have OCD.
Yeah, maybe that was just a weird thing I was doing, and
yeah. And I think looking back, I've always had OCD since I was probably 8 years old. But it wasn't until this moment in my life that it took over my daily life, and I couldn't function the same.
Mm-hmm. So that was with your first baby, and you had your son. What was that like for you? Did you have the same type of symptoms, or did you have any symptoms at all?
So with the second pregnancy, I think it was, I had thoughts, but I think it was more the fear, like this is going to come back, and it's going to come back stronger. And it did while I was pregnant, there was times where it was really bad. And I think that's where my fear of losing my mind started.
Yeah.
And that kicked in really strong. And it just kind of went on probably until my second trimester. I started looking for help again. And I told my husband, I'm like, I need professional help at this point, because I didn't want to take the medication while pregnant. And I wasn't functioning.
Because you were scared to have postpartum psychosis, or
yes,
any type
that
of
was the biggest fear. And at that time, my husband he worked graveyard shift. So I was by myself with my daughter like most of the day, and there was amazing days, but there was days where the OCD just really grabbed onto that, and it was just kind of like you're by yourself with her, or who knows what you're going to do next. You're pregnant, hormones are going crazy. So the fear there was pretty bad, and it was until the second trimester that I looked for help.
So did you have any like symptoms or compulsions around the fear of going crazy, or were you just waiting for the moment kind of till it happened?
I think at that point it was kind of like waiting for the moment and really not knowing what's going to happen next. Now I have compulsions around that.
Yeah. Well, you can tell me about those later, but I want to know what happened. So did you find a therapist while you were pregnant?
Yeah, so I started going to therapy, and they kind of treated it at first as just anxiety. Well, I told my doctor about it. My doctor sends me to a psychiatrist. I told the psychiatrist about it, and he's like, I think you just need to see a family therapist.
But did you tell him that you looked at the OCD checklist and that you had all the symptoms?
So his answer was, I think you have a bit of OCD and a little bit of, I forgot what he said. Like I was just so afraid of it happening again. But he said it was a little bit OCD. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, must not be that serious. And at this point, I'm still not very knowledgeable about what's going on because it's so on and off.
Yeah.
And he sent me with the family therapist, and she was awesome. And I was going with her probably once every 2 weeks. And she's asking me, and one day I'm telling her my thoughts. And I love to bake. And I told her, I had a silly thought the other day that I was going to bake for my neighbors and I was going to poison them. And then I didn't want to bake anymore. And that's where she was like, I think you have OCD.
Okay. Well, because that's how it's like, that's, I think, one that's easy to notice as like a contamination or fear of poisoning people is super common.
Yeah, because I would tell her about my scary thoughts, but before that thought, and she'd be like, she was just trying to teach me to relax, and she was trying to teach me like to get a better relationship with my daughter at that time. And then once I told her the thought of like, I thought I was going to poison my neighbors, then she was she's like, I think you have OCD.
Okay, well, thank God she finally made that connection.
Yeah, that was like 3.5 years later.
So frustrating.
From when my symptoms started until I started going with her, it was about 3.5 years.
And did she diagnose you with OCD, or did you have to go see somebody else?
I had to go see somebody else. So this was a psychologist in the same office, and I was just so happy because he also had OCD, and I'm like, he knows what he's doing. And at this point, I had researched what the therapy looked like and what it was, and by following people online, YouTube, you kind of get an idea. But he didn't know what he was doing. He was getting ready to retire, and I think he already had he had already figured out what worked for him.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of reassurance from him.
Okay. When did you finally get, or did you ever find a therapist that was able to treat you with ERP and give you some tools to use?
Yeah, I was going through a bad time. It was getting really bad again, and I finally reached out to an OCD center in LA, and that's still the therapist I go to now, and I love her.
Good. So. I love OCD-LA. You do teletherapy, obviously, right?
Yeah.
So when you say that it got really bad, was that when you were still having the same theme, the psychosis theme?
Yes, I have the harm one it's always there. It's kind of in the background. For some reason, it's kind of easier to be like, oh, okay, yeah. It's just another harm thought, which sounds easy, but it was so difficult for the first 2 years. And right now, I think the hardest one for me is probably fear of losing my mind or developing schizophrenia. And that one's on and off, but when it kicks in, it kicks my butt.
Can you share some of the compulsions that you do around that, if you do any?
Oh, so many. I think the main one would probably be like reassuring myself that someone else is hearing what I'm hearing. Or if like I see a shadow, I kind of want to second glance and make sure it's like that plant I have in the corner. Or like all of a sudden I started with like smells. I want to make sure that the people around me are also getting that same. If I smell something weird, I want to make sure they're smelling it too. And it's hard for me. Sometimes I just do it automatically. And my husband knows now to like, yeah, you're going nuts.
It's funny when you start telling the husbands the right way, because they're like, oh, great, this is all I wanted to say to begin with. And then they go full blast with the like not reassuring you.
Yeah. And he after I let him know what he has to do, he enjoys it.
I think they'd like to see you squirm. It's funny that you have the smell one too, because the psychosis theme, I had that also with my second baby. Our stories are really parallel. First baby was the harm thoughts, and then second baby, same thing, where I was like so worried that it was going to come back again, and then it latched onto fear of going crazy. So some of my compulsions were like, I don't know if you did this too, but I would also look at things around me and just get filled with so much doubt that I was seeing it how it was supposed to look. So I would like ask people, the trees are moving, right? Or like,
same thing, especially with my husband. And he has really like, or I'll use my daughter sometimes, which I hate to say this.
Oh, I know. I have in the past been like, Lucas, did you hear that weird noise? And then
yes, I hate to say that, but I'm like, okay, I need to stop. Like I'm reassuring myself to the point where my daughter will be like, Mom, what are you talking about? Just leave it alone.
How old is she?
She's 8, and she so and I'm really trying to watch what I'm doing now because she also has anxiety. So
do you think it's genetic, or do you think she like learned some of your behaviors?
I think it's a little bit of both. Now that I look back and I see some of my family, I definitely genetically I have it. And then she's definitely learned behaviors too.
So where are you at right now? I know that you are working with OCD-LA and they're really great. But how are you doing generally?
I feel like I'm doing much better. I am still doing therapy, and I'm so self-conscious about it because I guess after I do research, it says, it only takes so many therapy sessions. And for me, it's taken a lot longer.
Yeah. Did they say, what is it? It says like 10 sessions or something, right?
It could be like 10 to 20 sessions. And I'm like, well, not for me.
It's hard. Do you think that it's hard because you have kids and you're not doing the exposures like that often?
I think for me, I just financially, it was hard to do it as many times as you had to. And so I started off kind of slow. And I was really, sometimes I fall behind on my exposures. And with this quarantine, it makes it even worse.
Because you kind of want to be alone to do them.
Yeah, and some of them could be so emotionally draining. And me, I cry all day. So for my daughter to question, I ran out of lies.
Yeah.
So I just have to be like, I'm having a bad day.
Do you talk to your daughter about anxiety and OCD?
I had to. Kids are so smart. They notice everything. And she's so good at asking questions. I had to have a conversation with her about, mommy goes through tough days. I have anxiety. And there's just going to be days where it's going to be rough. And now she's she's having weird thoughts herself that is really hard for her to talk about. And in a way, it makes it easier for me to address that, what she's going through. So it's hard sometimes.
I'm sure. I have an anxious kid too. And I feel like when I notice him behaving in a certain way, like sometimes he'll just be doing normal stuff, playing, and then he'll go like that, look scared. And I'm like, did he just have an intrusive thought or something? And then I start to worry. But then there'll be sometimes when he'll be playing, and all of a sudden, Mom, I'm like, what happened? He goes, what if I'm living in a dream? I'm like,
and then your at least my OCD brain just goes with it.
I know, mine too.
And I have that fear, and it's actually one that I'm dealing with right now. Like, what if I'm traumatizing her and I'm creating trauma and I'm creating like a mental illness for her?
Mm-hmm.
That becomes anxiety provoking for me. So it just can get really hard with kids. And for me, it's like I have to go to my husband and be like, is this my brain, just my OCD working up, or do you see this too?
That's helpful to have somebody to ask, because sometimes it's not even for reassurance. It's just like a more grounded perspective.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, I mean, yes, I have OCD, but not everything can be attributed to my OCD. But it's so easy to wonder and get caught between the two. Like, is this really happening, or am I just being weird?
Yeah, exactly. And it becomes really hard sometimes to notice the two and to separate them. Like, is it my OCD, or am I really, really honestly concerned about something?
Yeah.
That is real.
That's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask you now some of the questions that I got on my Instagram that they wanted to know about, since you had to stay in the psych ward. I think so many people are curious about that. It was, okay, since you had to stay in the psychiatric ward, are you more scared of mental illness now?
I think yes. I think after being there, when I was there, I didn't have time to I noticed things, I observed things, but I just was so concerned about me getting better.
Yeah.
I really didn't have the time to be scared. I just wanted to get better, to get back to my daughter. But then after getting out and analyzing and going through my second pregnancy, it was like going back in time and thinking, oh, is that going to happen to me? And what I saw here, is that going to happen to me now? So yeah, I'd definitely be terrified to go back.
Yeah. That's one of my worst fears too. I don't know why. I just imagined that it would be really uncomfortable.
I mean, and it wasn't horrible. I don't want to paint this as it being horrible, or they were really, they're trying to help you.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's just, I feel like I didn't have to be there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, because you really didn't. You were of a sane mind, and they just didn't know what was causing your intrusive thoughts. Okay, another one. So being in the psych ward, did that make you question your own sanity? And how did they treat you while you were in there?
So they were really nice, and they just try to keep you busy, and I think just really observing, like, can you go out, and are you going to be okay?
Yeah.
But what was the other half of the question? I'm sorry.
Did it make you question your own sanity since they put you in there?
I think yes, after getting out for a little bit and having these intrusive thoughts, because they didn't stop, they just kept coming. It was like, I've already been there. What does this mean? And then going to group therapy wasn't really helpful. And you hear everyone else's stories when they're going through stuff. So yeah, of course, totally question my sanity.
But throughout all this, because they call OCD the doubting disorder, did you doubt your ability to take care of your daughter, or were you always strong? That Or were you always strong in knowing that you were going to be able to do that and that you weren't a danger?
No, there was definitely days where I don't want to be alone with her.
Mm-hmm.
That was really scary for me. I remember when we first moved, she was probably a year old, and I remember opening my windows. Like, that was a compulsion. I opened my windows because in my head, if I was doing something to my daughters, my
And
neighbors,
would hear, right?
the neighbors would hear and they would stop it.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was so scared that something would happen to her.
What did you have any other compulsions? I'm trying to think if I would did you avoid staying home? Like, did you go to public places a lot?
I would go to an aunt's house and I would stay the night sometimes there since my husband had the graveyard and I pretty much lived at her house. Poor woman, she probably wanted to kick me out every day, but she was so nice to keep me there. And she was a big help when I first moved here because I just didn't want to be alone. She was doing the right thing, but I know that was a lot of reassurance.
Yeah. But sometimes the reassurance, like before you're diagnosed, the reassurance is what just keeps you going and gets you through the day. Like,
Yeah.
because I did that too. With my husband worked overnight, worked 24-hour shifts, and sometimes he would have to work the whole weekend. So I would just pack up and take my son to my father-in-law's house. And I'd just be like, I get really anxious when John's gone. Can I stay here? But really it was like, hey, if I'm with you, it's less likely that I'll be able to murder anyone. So
Yeah.
can you help me relax?
And the feeling feels so real. It feels so scary, even though you know you don't want to do anything. Like, you're not going to do it, but
Yeah.
it just feels so scary.
Well, because the thoughts are so opposite. It's obvious to an outsider that they're ego dystonic because you're having these thoughts, but you're literally doing everything in your power to make sure that it doesn't come true.
Yeah, and for me, another compulsion was like people that knew about it. It was almost like I was explaining myself constantly because I wanted them to know I'm not a bad person. I'm not going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted them to understand, and they're not going to understand. They don't go through it, you know.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, shut up now. I don't want to hear anymore.
I know. I'm sure they're over it already.
Yeah.
Kids in my family are like, oh, are you talking about OCD again? Okay. So now that you're able to identify compulsions and you're like are you out of crisis mode? Like, where are you at in recovery?
Out of what? Sorry.
Crisis mode.
I think so. Honestly, it comes and goes. It just depends how strong my fears kick in. But for the most part, yes.
So what do you do to keep your anxiety at bay or keep your intrusive thoughts at bay? Do you have some treatment methods that work for you or coping skills?
For me, I just try to take care of myself. Healthy eating. I always trying to go for a walk. I started seeing a naturopathic, which for me was really helpful.
Yeah.
For me, that and ERP has been key, honestly. And then I like to go out and I like to have things to do in the week. So that, for me, that really helps.
Like, stay busy and
try to have activities with the kids. Have a plan. What are we going to do this weekend? Or I think keeping busy, but also understand, because for me that can become a compulsion to avoid the thoughts. So I have to pay attention to that.
What are your goals for your OCD treatment in the future?
I think not relying on my therapist so much and could stop seeing her as often as I do.
Cool. Now, if you could give advice to a partner or a loved one of somebody who is struggling like you, how would you tell them to help their partner?
For me, when I was going at my worst or when I have my worst times, I just told my husband, just listen to me. Don't give me reassurance. you don't have to do any of that. Just for me, it's important for someone to listen to me, and I can just let it out, I guess.
Yeah. That's good advice, because sometimes people just want to help, and they want to solve the problem, and they want to convince you, right? Like, to just believe the rational and logical thing, but kind of backfires everything.
Yeah. And there was points where he wants to make it better, and I'm like, I don't need you to make it better. I just need to vent a little and just let out some of this emotion, and that's it.
If you could tell yourself something, what would you tell yourself? What would you tell the Araceli that was like so confused and didn't know what was going on and didn't trust herself?
I'm more compassionate with myself.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very easy to be compassionate with other people, and when it comes to at least for me, when it comes to myself, I'm really hard on myself. Like, you should be able to do this. You should be able to snap out of it. This is silly. And it just makes everything so much harder.
Yeah. I have to mute my mic for a second. Okay. Yeah, I think we covered everything, but that's good advice, especially the have compassion part, because it's so easy to do as a mother. You have compassion for everyone around you, but it's really easy to forget about yourself.
Yeah, very easy.
Okay, Araceli, thank you so much for sharing. I think you cleared up a lot of questions, especially about the whole psych ward thing. I just know from all the moms that message me that there's so many of us who had the same fear as you and who are worried about that. But it is something to keep in mind when telling people about your intrusive thoughts, because you want to make sure that your message is going to be heard the way you want it to. Like, I think one thing to include, if anyone's listening, if they want to tell someone what they're experiencing, you hear that? The one thing to include is that you absolutely don't want to do what you're thinking about. It just keeps coming repetitively.
Right. Yeah. And I hope it could help someone. Someone's going to do something. If it could help one person, that's awesome.
I'm sure it will. Well, have a nice rest of quarantine. I don't know how long this will last. And if anyone has, hold on. If anyone has any other questions that they have for Araceli, you can always go to my Instagram. It's at windsor.flynn and just DM me, and I'll always respond. Also, if you have any other mental health questions, always go to madeofmillions.com. They are a great resource. I have another episode of Maternal Minds next week. I think the mom also had harm OCD. It seems really like a common theme. Okay, guys, have a nice rest of the day. Thanks for listening.